I was working with some woman during the week, and she says, I do everything for everybody. and my answer is, and what do you do for yourself? And the answer is, nothing. And what you're doing for everybody is what you need to be doing for yourself. And support people to do things for themselves. But please don't do it for them, because you keep them helpless. But of course you have found a very powerful way to get seen in this world by being the one who does everything for everybody else. And very often, you know, what we do out there is what we need to be doing within ourselves. I think one of the things that we, you know, in the teenage years, where an awful lot of emphasis on education comes about when children go into secondary school. Now remember, I said education is no index of maturity. And we've seen that with the recession, we've seen it with the Catholic Church. Catholic Church was the most educated people in Ireland for a long time. I mean, I was in a monastery myself for 7 years, right? Got a lot of education, but no maturity. The people, the banks and in the financial institutions and the government, highly educated people who actually had very low maturity, because they wouldn't do what they did if they had the maturity. So, during the teenage years, right, it is so important that we keep an eye on the inner course of young people. What is happening within them? What is happening in their interior worlds? You know, Lao Tzu put it so well thousands of years ago, Chinese sage, right? Know yourself. A la Socrates, right? Know your child. And be sure your child knows you. And how many of us ever, as parents, allow our children to get to know us? Because it's important to know where we are, where we're coming from, what our values are, what our beliefs are, what our fears are. Whatever they are, the child needs to know, so they then don't have to, because once you talk them out consciously, they don't have to bend their lives around you. So we need to keep an eye on the inner course, because we put so much emphasis on education and not enough at all on the maturing process of children. And the challenges are major for young people. The challenge of having a sense of one's own unique self, the most important challenge of all. Becoming self-realized and self-responsible. Becoming emotionally and socially independent. Developing one's own beliefs and values. Determining one's educational and career paths. Establishing financial independence. Creation of mature relationships with same and opposite gender peers. And management of full intimacy with another are just some of the challenges they have. And I'm wondering how many parents and teachers really see all these challenges that teenagers face. And you see, if you don't have a sense of your worth and value, then it's very hard to face those challenges. If you don't have a sense of your capability, it's like, you know, I've given talks in so many continents, right, and so many different groups. And I've asked so many groups this question: how many people in this audience can honestly now put up their hand and say, I know I'm a genius, Tony? How many people? Thank you. No. Things are improving, right? Why aren't you putting your hands up? Because each person here is a genius. Please do not confuse genius with accomplishments. The child, for example, who my own twin, right? If I was always top of the class, he was always bottom of the class. That's genius. It takes genius to be bottom of the class. Who's the most noticed kid in the class? Who? The loud one. Yeah, or top of the class and bottom of the class. So that's genius. Same with going for the average is genius. Out in the street, right, he was so streetwise. I was street naive. So now we're using our intelligence in different ways. But intelligence is always there. Genius is always there. Please don't confuse it with accomplishments. Everybody says, you know, Mozart was a genius. No, actually Mozart was known as a nincompoop. Mozart couldn't make a cup of tea for himself. By age 7, Mozart had done thousands upon thousands practice on piano. He only knew music because his father wanted a famous composer. But in terms of every other aspect of his life, Mozart, that's a Freudian slip. Moses. I'm thinking of the child in the basket, I think. Okay, Mozart, he died in poverty at age 30. He was a very accomplished composer, there's no doubt about that. But he was no more a genius than anybody else in this room. But you see, if we don't have a sense of our genius and our intelligence, how can we inspire our children to be capable in this world? How can we? We don't trust them. We don't believe in them. We don't say, just do it. Fascinating how teenagers manage the whole journey from childhood into adolescence. And you see, adolescence, as I was saying, is about more separation out from parents and family, because I need to prepare for going out to the wider world. The child, right, needs to get out of the mother's arms, right, and out of the cradle and begin to explore the world of home, right, and outside home in the neighborhood. But the teenager is faced with a much wider world. And very wisely, they need to form some support outside the family, and the peer group becomes very important for them. And see, many parents, try to block teenagers from their peer group because they might get into trouble or they might be doing the wrong thing, right? But their peer group is so important because that's their support group in order to find some safety in the world, to explore it and to be themselves. And they start with the same gender. You get this real polarization of gender in the early teenage years, boys with boys and girls with girls. And that's so clever, because you're much more likely to be accepted by your own gender first. And if you get this what we call group homosexual phase, or this group, boys with boys, girls with girls. And the group becomes a very important part of your support. And so you're building up some supports for you to move into the wider world and to move out of family. And towards the end of that group homosexual phase, you get then the bosom pal with the same gender. And the bosom pal you tell everything to, that you wouldn't tell your parents or anybody else, which is interesting in itself, right? And very often that bosom pal relationship can often last for a lifetime. Now some teenagers get stuck in that group phase. You get a lot of men in their 40s and 50s, right, who are still going out with the boys. They really haven't gone beyond early teenage years, right? They're still stuck there, right? Because somehow that the group didn't provide enough support for them to move out more, right? Or they had already had a low self-esteem coming from the family situation. So it was very difficult then for them to go out further. You then get that very transition moody time. We talked about how teenagers can get very moody. And they want to be left alone, and lots of things are coming up for them, not only around education, but around attraction now to the opposite gender. Not attraction sexual to begin with, but they now need to check out the other 50% of the population, right? Boys with girls and girls with boys, right? Will they offer support? Will they support me, right? Now, if like myself or that like girl I was talking about, if you hate yourself physically, right, you don't actually now explore that opposite gender world, because you're too unsure, you're too uncertain, you're terrified of being rejected again, and you lose that opportunity. And very often you may have to do that much later in life. You stay with your own gender group. Or I remember one man I was working with put a full all the years that he was in secondary school, he stood in the same place in the schoolyard every day with his head down and mixed with nobody. And nobody noticed. Can you imagine? Nobody noticed. Or nobody came forward if they did notice. So, and so I need to check out the opposite gender, right? And that's, you know, you get what we call the kind of dating phase. It's not about sexual conquest, it's about gender conquest. It's about seeing how many girls out there can I rely on to support me, and vice versa for girls with boys. So it's a real checking of the wider world and the supports that will be out there in the wider world when they need to go out there more and more. Now, I see if adults support that, wonderful, right? Because what often adults do is we tend to give too much advice. No, don't give any advice, by the way, to young people. Because when you give advice, you add vice to a situation that's already troubled enough. Because when you give advice, you're actually being superior, right? You're not helping the young person to find their own answers, because that empowers them. You disempower every time you give advice. And we're masters of giving advice. And I can assure you that when you talk to young people, they come to their own answers. Once you talk with them kindly, caringly, with belief in them, warmth and encouragement and support, they find their own answers. Why do we give so much advice? What's the catch in that for us?
Trust in ourselves.
You lack of trust in ourselves? But remember, if I give advice to a young person, the advice giving is about myself.
Validating your belief.
It's validating, you know, it's wanting to be important, it's wanting to be seen, it's wanting that people will need me. Yeah, or you want them to trust you so that they remain dependent on you. But see, if you're independent yourself, you won't give advice. You'll draw the young person out. If you're dependent, you'll give advice. Okay. So, and because teenagers is very wise, you know, around 16, 17, they think adults know nothing. And that's very clever of them, right? Because they want you to stop and, you know, back off. Let them find their own answers. And like I said, then see device and advice. Now, you know, if a young person is staying up in the room all the time and not talking, right, of course I'm going to show concern. And of course I'm going to... there was a young person that came to me, he's aged 20. For the first 6 months that he came, he never spoke. Week in, week out. He travelled all the way down from Dublin to Cork. He'd sit in front of me and he wouldn't speak. And I'd speak, and I'd talk. And I'd talk about my own life, and I'd talk about other people that I helped with and worked with, and I'd talk about ideas in psychology. And at the end of the hour, he'd go. Next week, he'd be back again, sit for a while, no talk, right? And then I'd start talking, right? And you see, patience is very important. Patience is one of the most important virtues for parents, teachers, and therapists, and managers and teachers. It is very important, because the young person is not trying to make life difficult for me. He's trying to let me know, through his silence, that somehow that he hasn't been heard, that he doesn't believe anybody would really be interested in listening to him. Something going on for him. And coming up to Christmas, I said to him on one of the times he came down, how is it for you coming down here every week and sitting with me in silence, and I chat away and I talk about different things, And he says, first line I got out of him now, I love coming down here. And I said, how is that? How is it that you love coming down here? Well, I learned so much. I really learned so much, and I love to listen. And what eventually emerged, the story began to emerge. His mother was, well, very work addicted, right? Very impatient, very cross, very irritable. And his father, it was his father's way and nobody else's way. If you didn't follow his father's way, then you were not then accepted. And I said to him at one point, I said, you know, what was it that you would have wanted from your mother that you didn't get? And what was it that you wanted from your father that you didn't get? And he said, well, from my mother, I would have loved honesty and patience. Now, the honesty was an interesting one. I wasn't surprised by the patience one, but I was surprised by the honesty one. And I said, oh, tell me about the honesty one. And he said, well, she would promise so many things, but she never followed through. And then I said, and what about your father? Well, he said, in terms of my father, I would have wanted him to be interested in me. And I would want him to accept difference. He knew exactly what he needed, right? But then, what was the silence for 6 months about?
Waiting to see if you had patience.
Absolutely. Didn't he really do it so well, right? Didn't he do it so cleverly that he was actually seeing, was I going to have the patience? Would I maintain my interest in him, right? Would I be open and honest with him, right? And would I accept difference? Now, was he a difficult client now? No, he wasn't a difficult client.
Quite powerful.
Very powerful. Absolutely very powerful. And so he says he's going to be my protege. And so, and he's back now. He had dropped out of school and everything, but he's back now doing college diploma at the moment. But things have shifted quite radically. Not more to do, but a lot done at this stage. But the genius of it. And I suppose the point about that story, right, and any of the stories, when you look at them closely, is what the young person is doing actually makes 100% sense. And we're going to see that, right, that when young people present with challenging or difficult behaviours, they are not trying to make life difficult for you, but they are trying to show you how difficult life is for them. And is there any mature adult in any place who will sit with me and try and explore with me what difficulties I am encountering? But you see, can you imagine if I'd got impatient with him? If I had said to him, listen, I can't be sitting here weekend and week. That's okay. Weekend and week out, right? In silence, right? So what's the point you coming down here if you're going to just sit and tell me nothing? Can you imagine if I'd got impatient? Oh my God, another major blow to his presence in this world. Another adult who doesn't understand and who doesn't create the safety for him to emerge. What a tragedy it would have been. So there's a wonderful connection between this, and it's important for us to see, right, that it doesn't take a lot of work, if you like, or thinking out how do I create safety for a young person to emerge, right? It's about love. It's about patience. It's about kindness. It's about showing interest, right? It's about believing in the young person, right? It's about support, and it's about also talking about yourself. I brought him an awful lot into my story because that obviously helped him a lot. That he saw that how I came through my story, he could come through his story as well. We can remember, anytime, I said it at the beginning, anytime we impact or meet a child or an adolescent, never underestimate the influence that you can have. There was one, just to give you again the cleverness of it, of actually one of the children of the woman says, I don't love my children. And she rang me up and said that he had developed OCD. And I don't believe in OCD, right? I don't believe children have disorders. I believe they have creations. And that their behaviours always have a creative meaning. Anyway, the obsessive compulsive behaviours that he had developed was, he was quite convinced that adults had germs, right? And if he went anywhere close to them, he would get infected. And he wouldn't sit in a chair where an adult sat, because he definitely would get infected. And he also had now an obsession that adults smell. And so his mother brings him to see me, right? Now, I'd met him once before, and I remember when he was leaving, I said to him, I really enjoyed my time with you, right? And I'm really going to miss seeing you. And that was genuine. Please don't say it was not genuine. And for months afterwards, his mother was telling me to say to her, Tony said he'd miss me. Now, the very fact that he was repeating that was so important, wasn't it? Because he was being missed all the time. Anyway, he comes in and we're sitting, we're connecting again, and I say to him, oh, I believe that you think that adults have germs. He said, yeah. And I said, and they smell as well. Yeah. I said, oh my God, how clever of you. Oh, I'm so impressed. I mean, what's been happening to you since I saw you? My dad keeps letting me down. He doesn't come when he said he'd come, right? My mum is still distant, right? And I said, so, adults, how are adults for you? They continue to let me down. And so by now seeing Alice, remember that if the two most important people in your life don't create a holding for you, who else are you going to trust? And so the germs is a way of, what's his creativity? If I keep away from adults because they have germs, and because if I go close to them, I'm likely to get affected. That's the metaphor. I'm going to get infected by their stuff, right? And they smell. So I need to even turn my head away so that I don't now suffer any more hurt. Oh my God, I said, I'm so touched and so impressed. I said, how about here? How about, I'm an adult, right? Do you think you're going to get germs from me? Do you think that I smell? Now listen to it. He's 8 years of age, right? And he said, oh, no. I know you love me. Children know. But isn't it very sad that we have to come to a therapist to find love? Isn't that so sad? That's such a sad indictment of our society, that so many of us need to go to therapists to find what we didn't find in family or school or community or workplace. How sad. How powerful as well. Okay. Now, it's so important that when the young person presents with any difficult behavior, right, is to stay separate, right? If you think the young person is really trying to get at you, trying to hurt you, upset you, you're actually getting enmeshed with their behavior. And that only leads to more conflict. You need to stay separate. And you need to ask yourself the question, what is the young person trying to draw my attention to? What are the hidden issues that he is scared to bring me into? Ask open questions, by the way. Don't ask closed questions. If you ask a closed question, did you study your maths today now? You know, did you work hard in school today? That's a closed question, right? It's your agenda now that's going on. It's not the child's agenda at all. It's your agenda. And the kid knows that immediately. You're not showing any interest when you ask a closed question, by the way. You show a lot of interest when you ask an open question. And the open question, how was school today for you? How are you feeling these days, right? How do you feel about your future, right? How do you feel about your friends? I know the how question is a great question. And it really shows interest. But if I ask a closed question, the teenager is so clever, they know it's my agenda. And they would close up, and rightly so. So yeah, there are transient issues, but it's the enduring issues are the important one. You know, it's like that teenager who was hitting his mother, right? Or that young person that was all silent. Their difficulties went right back into childhood, right? Whereas if a child was quite happy in primary school, had good friends, enjoyed school, loved learning, was affectionate, could tell you, I'm not happy, or I'm sad, or I'm upset, is expressive of the emergency feelings, can receive affection and express affection. They may encounter some transient difficulties, but they normally work through them with patience, with adults, right? It's the enduring ones, right, that are really the ones we need to look out. I'm going to have a look at those later. Okay. So, young people who present with troubled and troubling behaviours are not out to make life difficult for others, but they are out to show how difficult life is for them. Attention to what lies hidden is paramount. Please don't guess, don't assume, inquire. What's happening for you? How is it that you hate going to school? Yeah. They may not. Yeah, they may not, and you can't force it. Remember, if they don't tell you, it may be because it's not safe. They may not trust that you can hold it. Or they may feel that you might get impatient or cross. It may just not be safe yet. And you don't push, you just say, I want you to know I'm here, I want you to know I'm concerned, right? And I'm here when you're ready to talk with me. Please don't push it. It's like with the young man I talked with you. If I pushed it, I would have lost him. Patience is so important. I can assure you that no adult and no teenager wants to stay in hiding. None of us. But we'll only emerge, right, when it's safe. So, so we'll put our toe in the water of safety, but we'll only do it bit by bit by bit. So if you look at the story, how safe has it been to express the truth, right? To be open in this family. How safe has it been? And how open have I been with my son or daughter? Because that's important. Model what you're expecting. Always do that. Be sure what you expect of your teenager that you do yourself. Gandhi put that so well. Be the change you want to see. Now, I changed it slightly. Be the emergence you want to see. Because I want the teenager to bring me into his hidden world and what he has hidden away about himself. And I want that emergence to occur. But I need to check first, well, have I emerged? Am I certain about myself? Am I confident? Do I love my work? Am I open about my feelings? Always reflect on yourself first. Okay. Parents who are defensive in their responses to teenagers' difficult responses are themselves crying out for help. They are not trying to make life more difficult for the teenager who is troubled. I'm sure it's becoming clear. Difficult behaviours, right, are creations. They're not conditions. Do you understand that, whether it's the child with the obsessions or the young man with silence or the young man with aggression. And I remember getting a phone call from a woman whose daughter was in third medicine. And she was telling me on the phone that she had got a second highest leaving cert in the country, and she had gone on to medicine. And, was continuing to achieve very highly in medicine. But a week before this phone call, she had gone for an oral exam as part of her course, and she panicked. And because of her panic, she failed the exam and was the first failure that she ever experienced. And the mother's on the phone to me, you know, my daughter's in bed, she's depressed, she doesn't want to go back to college, she feels her life is over. Can you help? And I said to the mother, yeah, I can help. And I can help your daughter to get to a place where she does not confuse herself with an exam result. I'm not an exam result. I do not want to be confused with an examination result. And I can help her to get to that place. But doctor, how soon will you have my daughter back to university? And I missed an opportunity. Because sometimes, you know, because this girl was high risk. She was high risk of suicide. Because you see, if you've always been seen through high achievement and you fall off that pedestal, suicide is a major possibility, right? I'm sure, you know, you do know that 75% of people have been touched by suicide in this country? 75%. So, I missed an opportunity because when she said to me, you know, how soon will you have my daughter back to university? I said to her, Mrs., you know, when your daughter gets to that place, which I hope she'll get to, where she doesn't confuse herself with any achievement or examination result, I don't know what she will decide to do. But I know that she will decide what's best for herself. Because what opportunity did I miss? Mummy. I missed Mummy, didn't I? Because I need to say, when she said to me, how soon will you have my daughter back to university? I need to say to Mother, it's coming back to what I said here, that her behaviour of wanting her daughter back to university, rather than being more concerned about the well-being of her daughter, sure, that was her hidden stuff. And I needed to say to her, and how is it that's so important for you to get your daughter back to university? I missed the opportunity. And sometimes that happens, you know, your heart goes out to the younger person and you lose sight of the older person. And one of the things I've learned, I need to hold the parent or the teacher or anybody involved in the child's life as much as I want to hold the child or adolescent. They both need holding. No judgment, but understanding. So difficult behaviours are creations, not conditions. And there's always a story. You know, with over 30 years of practice, I've never yet not been able to trace the origins of troubling or difficult behaviour. I've never yet not been able to trace it to the story, to the narrative, right? The relationship context of the teenager's life needs to be the primary focus. What's happened? What's the context? What's the story, right? What's the narrative, right? The reason for that is not that I want to in any way blame anybody, but I need to understand what has led to this young person, you know, withdrawing from life so much, or, you know, having to get to high results, right? Or starving themselves, you know, so that they have the so-called perfect body, right? Well, what's the story, right? And unless I get into the story, then how can I then really understand what has brought the person to where they are? Each teenager, I said that already, has a different father and a different mother. Now, the creation of definite boundaries ensures teenagers take responsibility for themselves. And boundaries are, I have responsibilities to you as a mother or father. I'm going to follow through in those responsibilities around, you know, care of you, education of you, ensuring that, you know, of your physical care and your emotional care and social care and so on. And I will follow through in those responsibilities. And, you know, if you're out at 12 o'clock and you've you know, let me know that you're going to be in at 11. I'll be out in the car to collect you at 11. That's boundary. I follow through on my responsibilities. That's very important, right? And that creates such security for young people to know that you will follow through on your responsibilities, because you're modelling for them what you would want them to do as well. But you see, it's like the young man who was, you know, very aggressive towards his mother and the teachers, right? His mother's passivity was as much an issue in his aggressive behaviour as his father's aggression. You do understand that. This young person had no champion, neither father nor mother. Only one teacher. And there was the one teacher he worked for in secondary school, and that was the only teacher that befriended him. Didn't see him as trouble, but saw him as somebody needing support and friendship. And he worked for that teacher. Safe holdings are critical to teenagers' well-being. Only when there's safety, no criticism, no judgment, but love and affection and warmth and concern and support and listening and understanding. And you continue to put those bridges out, I can assure you the teenager, as the safety increases, will begin to come forward. But be patient. Don't push it. Parents are responsible to teenagers, but not for them. I said that. Okay. You can read a lot of this in the book. I want to go on to something which I think is good. It's a good question. How well do you know your teenager? I mean, when you look at that question, by the way, and you see it in your book, right, ask yourself, first of all, how well do you know yourself? Because you'll only know yourself. You'll only know your teenager to the extent that you know yourself. If there are parts you've closed down inside of yourself, then you cannot open those with your teenager. We can only operate out to another from where we are within ourselves. If I have a lot of closed doors within me, then how can I open those doors to teenagers? Okay. So, what gives your teenagers satisfaction and joy? What are your teenagers' hopes and dreams? What distresses your teenager? What are the life questions that engage your teenager? What challenges are important to your teenager? What are his experiences of, and what meaning does he attach to sexuality? Which is, there's quite a good chapter in the book on sexuality, and we have a new book coming out in the new year called Finding Sexual Realness, because we haven't come to any maturity in Ireland around sexuality. We've gone from taboo to license, but not maturity. And we have a lot of work to do around maturity around sexuality. We're still embarrassed around having that talk. Isn't it crazy? We're still embarrassed. And listen, you know, you'd be better now at talking with him than I would. And the most, you know, sexuality is, remember, sexuality is passion for life. It's not just about the sexual act. Please don't confuse sexuality with sex. But I bet many of you do. Sexuality is that passion, that zest for life, right? Part of that is sexual pleasure, but it's only one part of it. So what are his experiences? And of course, you know, what a lot of parents say, I don't want to know. And you see, how can now the teenager, if they have worries or fears around sexuality, how can they now come to you? Because they'll pick up that for him, I just don't want to know. And you see, if I do that as the parent, it means I don't know my own sexuality. Because if I knew my own and was confident in it, of course I say to my own son or daughter, I'm here if you need any, you know, to talk around sexuality. I'd love to be able to support you in it and listen to you around it. Who are his friends? You know their names, where they live, their telephone numbers. What are the names of, and have you met the parents of your teenager's friends? What school subjects does your teenager like and which does he dislike? Is your teenager content and challenged in school? Which teachers does your teenager speak well of, and who are those he resents? That's a real point to that one. Do you know why? Is your teenager interested in any sport? Does he have any favourite sporting team or figure? What kind of music does your teenager listen to? Who are his favourite singers, groups or composers? When troubled, now this is an important question, to whom is your teenager most likely to go? It's a very important question, that one. Does he go to anybody in the family? Does he go outside the family, or does he go to nobody? And why isn't he coming to you? If your teenager drives, this is such an important one. Do you know that he drives responsibly in a way that is conscious of his own safety and that of others? Because you get some teenagers, I don't know how their parents let them out in a car. They don't somehow know how they drive, because they can drive very dangerously. And a lot of road deaths have been due to teenagers not being experienced enough in driving. Is your teenager passive or aggressive? Do you know what has given rise to and presently triggers those responses? Is your teenager interested in reading? What books or magazines does your teenager read most? Is he interested in film? And what is your teenager's favourite type of film? Is your teenager interested in computer games? And watch for the addiction, because it's becoming major now. How much time does your teenager spend watching television or on computer? What does your teenager most love to do in his spare time? If your teenager has a part-time job, have you met the employer? Now, I want to finish up with this one because it's the important one. It's very important to see when your teenager is distressed, it comes from something that lies hidden. And the distress is the doorway into what's hidden. I always say suffering is a path, and it's a path into what's hidden. And so difficult behaviour is a path into what's hidden. If you think the difficult behaviour is the problem, then you'll go around in circles and it'll keep increasing. If you see the difficult behaviour as a doorway into what's hidden, then you're much more likely to get to the hidden issue of what the young person needs to talk about. So, to what degree is teenager operating from a shadow self, from a closed off self, a screen self as I sometimes call it? And to what degree is a parent or teacher operating from a shadow or screen self? So, you know, if I'm operating from a screen self, that I have a whole lot of hidden issues as a parent or as a teacher, then sure, I'm now going to transmit my unconscious issues onto my marriage and onto my child, daughter or son, right? Quite unconsciously. But I certainly am not in any solid, open place to now be a source of help for my teenager. So I also need to check with myself first. Am I operating from an open place, a real place, or from a screen place? Troublesome behaviour comes from inner turmoil. Now, these are some of the shadow behaviours, as I call them, of adults. Irritability, dismissiveness, aggression, passivity, unrealistic expectations, apathy, overprotection, lack of affection, violence, dominance, rigidity, perfectionism. Did you ever go into some houses where one of the parents is perfectionist? Everything is in its place. There's not even a drop of water on the draining board. The only thing that's out of place is the child. And so, and quite unconsciously, having everything perfect becomes more important than the person themselves and more important than the child. Fear of failure, addiction to work, addiction to success, advice giving, anxiety and depression. These are some examples of parents' shadow behaviours. Now, you're talking about transient ones. Transient shadow behaviours of teenagers may be worrying about having a pleasing personality. That happens with a lot of teenagers, right, to begin with. Examination anxiety is very common. Concern about physical appearance is quite common. Wanting to be liked, hard man behaviour. You get a lot of that in early adolescence, right? Not liking their bodies or how they look. Shyness, rebelliousness, anxiety about not having enough money, sexual insecurity. Some transient issues. These are more of a greater concern. These are enduring ones from childhood. Maybe sometimes even going right back into the womb, some of these start, right? Perfectionism, intense worry about examinations, wanting to drop out of school, having no friends, feeling unattractive, hating themselves, pessimism and fatalism. You know, it's like a young woman I was seeing today, and she just hates her life. She doesn't feel that things are ever going to improve. She's attempted suicide twice in the last 3 months. Feeling that they are never good enough, avoiding contact with their peers, intense shyness. Having a strong feeling that nobody likes them. Having a terror of failure, isolating themselves, sexual promiscuity, depression. Remember, depression is about what's hidden. Depression is what you push down. Depression is the friend that wants something to come up. It is not a condition. It's an emotion that you create in order to push down what you dare not show, but it also is drawing attention to what needs to come up. Same with fear. Fear is not a condition. Fear is a creation. And fear lets me know what is frightening for you to show, but it also draws attention to the fearlessness that needs to emerge. Fear is a friend. Depression is a friend. They are not enemies. There is no enemy within us. Okay. Depression, high anxiety, suicidal feelings and thoughts, aggression, refusal to listen or accept help. And so there are some young people, that they don't want to talk to anybody, right? And it's a real source of worry because somehow they've learned not to trust anybody. And it's very difficult to then bring them to somebody, right? When that happens, by the way, it's very important that the parents go and talk with somebody. Don't insist that the young person comes. And so very often if the parents come and we work at what may be going on and the parents begin to change their behaviours and come into consciousness, very often the young person will begin to move. There's always a way in. What's Henry Ford, I think, said it, for every problem there's an infinity of solutions. Self-harming. When young people come to me and they've done their cuts, right, and so many people give out to them, how could you do that to yourself? How could you do that to your parents? And you're making it more likely they'll cut even more because you're criticising them. And I'll say to them, show me the cuts. And I said, tell me all the ways you've been cut up over your life now. I want to hear about the cuts you've experienced. That's what they're about. They're trying to draw attention to what they dare not speak. How so clever. Okay. I said this at the beginning. You can't cure a problem by hurting. And I know, with the best intentions, but see, the path to hell is paved with good intentions, right? But with the best intentions, we'll say, what do you think is going to happen to you if you don't go to school? What do you think is going to happen if you don't study, right? Do you think now somebody's going to give you a job and come into the house and give you a job? Do you think that's what's going to happen? Do you think, see, you're hurting now. You're hurting the child more, right, or the young person more. But you obviously think you're doing your best. You're not conscious that you're actually even making it less likely that the young person will move now. If you were conscious, you'd be saying to your son, I'm really concerned about, your lack of motivation, and I'd love to discover what's going on for you. Hear the I messages, hear the concern, hear the tone of voice, right? Hear the warmth and the affection. Now, see, I've removed the threat. And I may have to say 70 times 70, right? Until they trust it. But I'll continue letting them know, I love you, and I'm concerned, and I'm here, but no pushing. Reactions add fuel to fire, right? So that when I react to a child's difficult behaviour, then it's one difficult behaviour meeting another difficult behaviour, and all it does is escalate the situation. Patronising, moralising, preaching, advising, reassuring do not help. Right? They disempower. They label. They preach. They show no understanding. They're judgmental. They don't help. Now, some parents blame themselves. Oh my God, I'm such a bad parent. It must be all my fault, right? And now these parents are crying out for help because you've done your best. Every parent does their best. Every teacher does their best, right? And that if I do come into consciousness where I begin to explore how I've been, up to that point I've done my best, though. But if I start blaming myself, now I'm crying out for help. It's like the teacher shouting in the classroom. He's crying out for help. The parent who blames herself is crying out for help. And how is it that you're blaming yourself? And what has happened to bring that about? What's very important is find the underlying intention, right? It's like the boy's silence. And like you said, it was absolutely brilliant. His silence was so brilliant. Because his silence, right, was in many ways what he had encountered all his life, nobody showing interest in him. And now testing me, will I now, in the face of his silence, be patient, be understanding, be compassionate, maintain my interest and love of him. He was really testing the water so cleverly. And the intention was to, bring me into the hidden issues that he felt, that his father had no interest in him, that his mother had no time for him, right? That his father, didn't see him for himself, for his uniqueness and difference, and his mother had no patience. Ingenious. Same with the boy, with all the aggression. The intention was to get to that work is dangerous. Work is highly dangerous for me to engage in. And once you get to it, your heart opens and you think, oh my God. I mean, I'm going to tell you one other story, and it really brings out this thing of getting to the intention. And it was about somebody very high up in education who approached me about his 17-year-old son. And his 17-year-old son was stealing a lot of money. Not in small amounts, but large amounts. And when he was caught more often than not, and in spite of being grounded and hit and his mother not talking to him, he would continue. And last resort, father approaches me, would I see his son? So I meet his son. Now, when I met the boy, our young man, after introductions and so on, I was very honest with him. I said, I know what has brought you here. Your father has told me about it. But I want to say something to you before we start. That I believe your stealing is a creation. I do not see it as a problem. But I don't know what the creation is about. And it's only when you bring me into your story that you and I will come to an understanding of what it's about. Now, what happens when I say that, do you think? Because, yeah, he feels safe. He doesn't feel threatened, right? He doesn't feel judged. And because he was used to being told you're a robber, nobody's going to trust you, nobody will ever give you a job, and of course you're pushing him further into stealing. I said, do you remember when it started? And he said, yeah, I remember. And I said, how old were you then? He said, I was age 9. And I said, oh, what happened at age 9 in your life, right? Well, he said, I had to draw this out a bit now, because he hadn't connected these things with the stealing. He said, well, a 4-year-old brother of mine suddenly died in the family. And I said, okay, and so what happened? He said, well, I was sent away to an aunt for 3 weeks. And when I returned after 3 weeks, I hadn't seen my brother dead, I hadn't gone to the funeral. And when I returned home, all signs of his life were gone from the family, and I daren't speak his name. Now, the father had said something very interesting to me about that child's death, right? He said to me, when that child died, my life ended. That was very significant. And in the 2 years following that child's death, he had 2 serious car accidents. This man did not want to live. Now, hold that bit of information. 6 months later, a little baby died in this family. And again, the boy was sent off to a neighbour or to an aunt, didn't see his dead sister. When he came back after 3 weeks, again, all traces of his sister were gone from the family, and he daren't mention his dead sister. He started stealing. And when he would be caught stealing, his mother, by the way, who had developed cancer in the arm following the death of the first child, because she had, how you swipe out of a child at times, she had developed a huge guilt around it and had developed cancer in the arm. When he would be caught stealing, his mother would say to him, you're such a trouble, I wish you were the one that died. When he was age 11, he was due to go on to secondary school. And his father, he was in education, determined that he'd stay back in primary school for an extra year because he was a bit too young to go on to secondary school. And the boy said to me, I pleaded and I cried with my father for 3 weeks. Please, 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 let me go on with my friends to secondary school. Because obviously his friends were very important for him. And his father put his foot down and he was held back in primary school. Why is the boy stealing? What was the stealing all about? What was he trying to draw attention to? What was the intention of the stealing?
To establish himself.
All that was stolen from him. Look what was stolen from him. Not only his brother and sister and his friends, but most of all his mother and father. His father's life ended when the first child, and the mother wished he was the one who died. Oh my God, it was brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant. I mean, I went over and hugged him and I said, oh my God, you found such a powerful way to communicate around what had been stolen from you, right? How brilliant of you, right? I mean, he couldn't speak it, but he could act it out. When I brought the father and mother in, the father was very responsive and really worked on establishing the relationship with his son. Mother was a bit more slow to come around, but eventually she did. Stealing stopped. Why did the stealing stop? Because the message was out. He had got it finally through. Thank you.